Therese Coffey.
You Speaker, in these unprecedented times, we stand at the crossroads of recovery and resilience, and the Autumn Statement gives us a clear roadmap in the challenging economic terrain that we still find ourselves in. I have a lot of time for the Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade, but I do remind him gently, when we came into power in 2010, of course it was the Right Honourable Member, the former Chief Secretary of Treasury, who left the note that there was no money left. And of course we have made lots of progress in that time, and we've taken long-term decisions. And it was only thanks to that we were able to pay for the substantial financial support that we rightly gave to families and businesses during the COVID pandemic. But we are still paying for that support, and that is part of the challenge that we indeed face. But of course, targeted support schemes like the furlough scheme demonstrated a deep understanding of challenges faced by businesses and employees. And I just remind the House, of course, no such scheme was put in place after the financial crash overseen by the previous Labour government. Now, we still have an aftershock from COVID at home in terms of economic productivity, but we are much boosted by the new trade deals that have been secured, and I look forward to taking advantage of this. But of course, the key issue that has happened has been the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Putin and the impact on energy costs. Again, we've made unprecedented financial support in the last few years towards households and businesses, and frankly, I was somewhat shocked by the Honourable Member for Glenrothes. I never thought of him as a Putin apologist. To try and suggest it's this government that stimulated the inflation is far from the truth. And he knows that it's that energy thing, that energy challenge that really made a difference. And it's why it's right that the government is investing in the energy of the future, and while also making sure we can keep the lights on. So therefore, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's why I welcome the measures that the Chancellor set out in his statement yesterday, reflecting a profound understanding of the evolving needs of our society and economy, highlighting the imperative to adapt and evolve. No, I won't. The Autumn Statement unveiled a comprehensive plan that addresses immediate needs while putting in place the foundations for long-term growth, and the measures outlined within it serve as pillars of stability, fostering hope and laying the true foundations for a resilient and prosperous future. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are 110 measures. I must admit I have not yet read the entire Green Book, but there were some parts of this that really stood out to me in terms of backing business and making work pay. It's clearly an Autumn Statement which sets the way for growth. If I think also of what are the different challenges that are there, if I first think of business and the full deduction, it's a very welcome moment to make this permanent, especially ahead of the Global Investment Summit that the UK is hosting this coming Monday. I used to work for a company called Mars Incorporated. I know that their investment in capital was absolutely pivotal to their manufacturing industry productivity and their financial success. So I welcome the improvement that we have seen now and this confidence in the long term in terms of investment in such manufacturing capital and indeed other elements too. Also, I know it will be particularly welcomed by businesses in my constituency, particularly those in hospitality and tourism, regarding the business rates. That is a particular help in terms of cash flow. But I have heard today from Andrew Dolby, who is the Managing Director of Brave Engineering in my constituency, a very successful business, largely driven by exports. He's made the point to me, which I will share with my honourable friends, that the R&D tax credits must run in parallel to see the development through to profitability, to then permit the investment in the selected capital equipment needed to produce the production efficiency. There is already substantial elements, but in terms of needing the skills and equipment that he provides to energy companies, they need to make their components parts of their system, and therefore they need to enhance how they manufacture these complex components, but there's no grant system to help support their customers succeed. So for this particular business, I would encourage my right honourable friend the Chancellor to consider further some work on indeed what the benefits would be of adjusting the R&D tax credit claims. I am mindful, by the way, though, that when they were introduced some time ago, about 15 years ago, there was somewhat of an abuse by that, particularly by financial firms. And so that's why I think the Treasury will continue to be cautious about it. But we need to make sure that in terms of R&D, we don't just focus on research, we focus on the development too. because that is where the value will come from it. In terms of other aspects of backing business, I'm thrilled that we are finally getting on with the reforms to Solvency II. I remember a meeting in Downing Street just after COP26, and I've been encouraged a lot of financial institutions there to raise this issue. And I'm really pleased that after some resistance, I think, by some of the institutions within government with the uncertainty it would bring, and indeed some of the concerns that pension fiduciary duties might have, I'm delighted that we've found a way through. It's really important that we do unlock that investment for the long term. It's always seemed odd to me that we want things like the local government pension scheme. Why don't they invest in the infrastructure that they want if they believe it's good value for money in terms of being used by taxpayers? So a combination, I'm not just referring solely obviously to local government, there are plenty of other insurers and similar where we can try and get a better return for long-term investment, but also for long-term pensions increasing. In terms of thinking about some of the other aspects that were there, of course one of the big highlights was this being one of the biggest tax cuts for employees in particular, and that is very, very welcome indeed. I don't think I'd be surprised if anybody votes against the legislation that's been announced for next Thursday, because it's really important that we help people in these challenging times with more money in their pocket. And indeed, I welcome the announcements made about stability that's coming in terms of benefits and pensions. And if I remind the House, twice in this Parliament, we have voted to set aside the earnings lock, recognising what happened with the dip in earnings that happened, where if we had not changed the law, we'd have frozen pensions. That wasn't the right thing to do. And so we put in place our triple lock and lifted pensions by 2.5% then, followed by a year of where there was a surge, a spike, almost a COVID-related distortion, where again the House agreed to set aside the normal earnings link. And when I was in the government then, I did say that we would, that would be it. We would apply the triple lock policy for the remainder of the Parliament. I'm very conscious this is one of the biggest uplifts in terms of earnings that people will enjoy, and that is right that their pensioners share in that success. So I'm delighted that we have kept to our commitments. I think the other aspect that the government has wisely recognised is about the changing of the local housing allowance. And again, we did make the shift during COVID, but then froze that change. Of course, with increase in interest rates, that's led to some challenges in terms of rents. So I'm really pleased that we have reinstated that. And it is a large sum of money, Madam Deputy Speaker. I recall a few years ago, by doing it was about an extra £1 billion. Just next year, this will be an extra £1.3 billion of spending. So I expect the amount of money that taxpayers now pay in housing support will probably be rising to about £32–33 billion a year. And that's a substantial sum to help others. But I am conscious that there have been particular challenges in regards to LHA and finding appropriate accommodation in different parts of the country. In terms of the broader point about the aspects of the Back to Work plan that's been announced alongside this, and indeed the reforms to welfare, this is really welcome. I have to say, some of the catcalls that were made at the Chancellor yesterday were completely undeserved. Absolutely. There's no greater dignity than being in work. And there are many people who want to work, who don't feel that they can work, struggle to do so, and it is absolutely right that we help people into work. Now, during my 3 years in DWP, of course, we were in COVID during part of that, but it was critical to try and help people's mental health and well-being, to try and support them to get back into work. And I'm conscious of some of the issues that people have raised, I will in a moment, about access to mental health appointments and similar. But it's really important that, in particular, the expansion of IPS and the other aspects of universal support, that is going straight to the heart of trying to tackle some of the barriers that people face. And instead of focusing, I think, with some of the changes that will be happening in terms of fit notes, the whole focus has been, and that was worked on this for some time and delighted that the policies came through last year and we're seeing the funding to support it, to make the focus on what people can do, not what they can't do. And I will give way shortly, but one of the things I'm very conscious of I know that GPs do not like to be the barrier to the gateway to benefits. I understand that. But it must be good for their patients if instead of just signing off even more time to be out of work, about helping them find a way through. I mean, if we wanted to be really radical, perhaps the NHS budget should pay for disability benefits of people of working age in order to bring that come together. I appreciate that may be a step too far at this moment in time, but it is that working together that we need to do so that people have a fulfilling life. And that is not only about being in work, being away from social isolation, but of course the extra financial rewards that come from being in work too. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Lady for giving way. We're all in favour of helping people back to work, but is it not the case that by focusing on the punishment aspect, as the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have done, we're not talking about helping people back to work, we're talking about starving people back to work, whether or not they're fit to go back to work?
I'm not sure why I gave way. I should have expected a low-quality comment like that. But in terms of the thinking about when we're coming out of COVID, I worked with the now Prime Minister on the way to work, and that's where we got 500,000 people back into jobs. And a lot of that, of course, comes with support, but there were other aspects, for example, bringing interviews into the job centre so that people actually turned up. I want to particularly commend our frontline work coaches, and candidly, if any Member of Parliament has not been to the job centre in their constituency or nearby, I strongly urge you to do so. They are a beacon of hope for people who are often desperate, but they're also the people who are frustrated by the fraud that they experience is going on and would like to do more about it. And I think this sort of approach really helps people to have not a stick approach, it's a carrot approach. It's absolutely giving quite a lot of time and a lot of support. And the expansion of the Restart programme, which I noticed is to be improved, and that's good. But it has been successful, as I say, in getting people back into work in that regard. So in terms of one of the things I would say to the House, there are quite a few ghosts, I suppose, within the benefit system. And it can be challenging to identify, and I'm conscious, actually, the Department of Work and Pensions really does consider the vulnerability of its claimants. So this is, I think, a sensible approach and a step forward, but I know it will be undertaken with great care. In terms of one of the other aspects that I wanted to talk a little bit more about, and that's to do with planning and energy. And I have to commend the Secretary of State for energy and net zero, energy security net zero, and the government more broadly, in one aspect, or certain aspect, that finally, we are going to have a much more coordinated approach in terms of the national grid. However, for constituents in my constituency, I've been trying to get this sorted for about 6 or 7 years, and the proposed reforms have come too late for my constituents, where at the moment we still have a disconnected element. We still have projects that should have come in as DC, infrastructure is built to support that, developer changes their mind, new infrastructure has to be built for the same developer, and that is having, there's no support when it comes to, there's no jobs that comes of that, and it's not about being a NIMBY, this is about trying to make sure that we do have a coordinated grid for the future, recognising the dynamic change that's happened instead of having the traditional coal and gas plants that we have. We've moved to where a lot more of our energy will be coming in direct from the coast. I do encourage the government to look again at considering existing brownfield sites where there's already energy connections, whether that's the Isle of Grain, whether that's in Bradwell in Essex, rather than basically ploughing up lots of acres and hectares of land that is otherwise used for agricultural production. And indeed, I do want to also recognise the concerns that my constituents have expressed about the change in status of a lot of this network to be almost a default approval. I know that goes against the normal way of doing planning, and I do understand why the government is considering this, but I know it will be very unwelcome in my constituency. I hope that we will, of course, be debating another time the national policy statements on energy, so I won't dwell on that now. Madam Deputy Speaker, but we do have to move as quickly as possible. I do understand that, but I do think a more holistic approach, even for projects that are in the pipeline now, should be undertaken, and it will not delay, is my understanding, the actual connections in the future. In terms of the free ports, the Port of Felixstowe is part of a free port and I welcome the extensions there given to the benefits. I would ask my honourable friend to work with the other departments, particularly DLUC, in making sure that the free ports really are effective and flowing, and to listen to the feedback from people in East Anglia on how we think some aspects could be improved. I'm also conscious in terms of spending that there are certain elements put out. We will discuss the local government finance settlement on another occasion, but I'm very conscious of the challenge that county councils in particular are facing in terms of social care, send and transport to school. I know historically a constituency like mine would be seen as exceptionally prosperous, and it always surprises people when I tell them that the median salary is far higher in Liverpool than it is in my constituency, apart from Liverpool Walton. And indeed, that is because a lot of people do come and retire to my part of the world, my constituency, and there is quite a long life. But people in the health system know that as soon as you go past 80, the likelihood of you engaging NHS and social care is much higher. So we shouldn't assume that this long-term life that people enjoy, especially who, of course, and I've continued to welcome people who come and see the very special coast that is in Suffolk Coastal. But that needs to be taken account of rather than perhaps some of the traditional assumptions. And indeed, the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Chris Whitty, recently, Sir Chris Whitty, highlighted this in his annual report. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are a few things where I would encourage the government to go even further on top of their 110 measures, and that's on continuing to focus on supply-side reform. We've already seen what's happening in terms of what's being proposed for energy, and I do understand trying to get a connection down, timeline down from 5 years to 6 months is very sensible and very frustrating for those people wanting to connect. But let's go a bit further. Let's look at further, and I spoke in the debate in Westminster Hall yesterday on the apprenticeship levy. Let's go a bit further on childcare. Again, I think the government has done some really good things. But let's go further and see if we really do need Ofsted to be the arbiter, or why can't we rely on our local councils who already have a statutory duty in terms of for children and indeed adults. So we could consider that, and it would really localise the provision as well. I could go further. I have a particular pet project, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the Department for Transport, which their Secretary of State well knows. And this is about, for people who passed their driving test before 1997, they can drive a C1 and a D1. Basically, it's a minibus, not for hire, and a C1 is a typical Tesco, Ocado sort of van in terms of delivery and used by many other firms, Amazon, DPD, and so on. It was due to a European regulation that it was required then to undertake the expensive kind of tests which are needed for HGVs. I think that's unnecessary, thankfully at the time, and I guess this must have been a Labour government that negotiated it. Or perhaps it was a Conservative one still, can't quite remember. Oh no, Labour came in, I apologise. It must have been a Conservative negotiation to keep a grandfather rights. I say let's get on, let's repeal that unnecessary law so that would allow many more people into the market to drive these sorts of vans, and it would also, and this is a particular issue for rural communities who don't have extensive public transport, a lot of the community transport relies on volunteers to drive these minibuses so people can get to a variety of activities, and they are currently having to pay quite a lot of money for the people to be trained to do that. And I see this as a really easy win. I understand, I keep being told it needs primary legislation, but let's do it if that's what's needed to boost, again, that aspect of productivity. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a lot in this autumn statement of which I am proud, and I do commend the Chancellor and the Prime Minister for their extensive work on this. This autumn statement resonates with compassion and foresight, and it acknowledges the hardships faced by individuals and businesses alike. But our commitment to bolstering our economy while extending support to those most affected by the recent upheavals It is commendable. It's the clear demonstration of the principles of a Conservative government, and I commend that the whole House supports the resolutions.